Good evening. Welcome to the City of Opa-locka virtual workshop. We called this workshop to give us an opportunity to discuss our 5-year recovery plan, which we expect to submit to the state of Florida for technical assistance before we get their thoughts before we approve it. With that, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Commissioner Bass.
Here.
Commissioner Burke.
Here.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Kelly.
Present.
Mayor Pygott.
I am here. Madam Attorney, could you state the protocols that govern this meeting?
Sure. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-69, issued by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis on March 20th, 2020, and subsequent amendments, municipalities may conduct meetings of their governing boards without having a quorum of its members present physically or at any specific location, and utilizing communications media technology such as telephonic or video conferencing as provided by Section 120.54 5B2 of the Florida Statutes. The members of the City Commission appearing remotely for this meeting are Vice Mayor Davis, Commissioner Bass, Commissioner Burke, Commissioner Kelly, and Mayor Pygott. An opportunity was given to the public to email the City Clerk prior to the workshop. The City Clerk will state for the record at the appropriate time whether there have been any questions, comments, or concerns on items you'll hear on this evening's meeting agenda. This meeting is being streamed live at www.youtube.com/user/City of Opa-locka.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Commissioner Kelly, could you lead us in invocation?
Our Father and God, we thank you for all of your many blessings. We thank you for life, health, and strength. We thank you, God, for our community. We thank you for those, oh God, who are impacted so heavily. Continue to strengthen them and heal their bodies. Oh God, give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding for those things that are pleasing in your sight. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
Amen. Mr. Vice Mayor, could you lead us in Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have, could you state the public comment protocols and state for the record the public comments we received for this workshop?
Good evening. The public had an opportunity to submit their comment for this meeting up until 4 p.m. today by emailing public comments at opalockafl.gov or by leaving a pre-recorded message at 786-618-2636. There are no public comments for this meeting.
Thank you. All right, Madam. All right. So we are here today to discuss our 5-year recovery plan. Last week, we had a presentation from a budget administrator in regards to this. That discussion was not fully completed. So we wanted to spend time to go through this before we submit a draft and thoughts to the state. With that, Mr. Manager, you have the floor. Unmute the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I yield my time to the Budget Administrator, Mr. Robert Anathan.
All right, Mr. Anathan, unmute your mic.
Apologies, it was unmuted a moment ago. I'm getting a message you cannot start screen sharing while other participants sharing. So, okay, good, thank you. Okay. Am I seeing? Do we see the PowerPoint at this point?
No, sir.
Okay. And how about now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, Manager, City staff, public. Thank you. Bob Anathan, Budget Administrator. We're going to take a spin through the 5-year plan tonight. The budget book that was online Monday night and was available in hard copy at noon yesterday. I'm sorry, on Tuesday has 150 pages of detail. We are not going to go through that tonight. Instead, I propose the, oops, not going to work that way. Sorry, I have a keyboard malfunction. It's not moving that way, so we'll do it this way. Apologies, the up and down buttons aren't working, so we'll go to plan B. Okay, a traditional way to make a presentation is to first tell you what I'm going to tell you, then tell you, and then conclude by telling you what I told you. And the presentation tonight is organized in that format. We're going to cover about 5 different topics. The first 3 relate to addressing concerns that have been brought up by various participants. And in each one of those, I intend to show how the plan addresses those concerns or those issues. State had concerns in terms of the prior budget that was submitted, and I will go through their concerns and how that's being addressed now. In the state's response, they also made reference to the state statute indicated here. It lists a few other requirements that need to be addressed by an organization that needs to demonstrate they are capable of being released from financial control. Third one is city priorities. Certainly our 5-year plan has to address that. That's the preamble. I'm sorry. Okay. That's the preamble. This is where I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you subsequently. We're going to look at fund highlights of about 7 funds, no more than 2 pages for each of them. It's a very high level thing. I will digress at one point. I will offer up 3 different options for millage decline over the 5-year period. It would be very helpful to get commission consensus as to which one they would like to see embedded into the 5-year plan. And then we'll wrap it up by saying, what have we talked about and what does that mean for the city? Good, I'm working again. These are issues that were raised by the state. I'm going to try and go through them very quickly. In blue is the issue the state raised, and in green is how the plan addresses it. The first issue raised by the state is, hey, you guys did not take into account your homesteaded properties when you figured out what your growth in your property tax is going to be. The answer to that is twofold. One, unlike most cities, only 5% of the city's tax base is related to homestead properties. So in terms of being a constraint on property tax growth, really is a very minimal impact. Equally importantly, the historical rates that we've looked at that we talked about the other night, which demonstrate that the city is really one of the growth leaders in the county at this point, were predicated on these homesteaded properties being included in it. So that really is not an issue. The percent of homestead property is very small, and it had no impact on the historical rates, and consequently doesn't have any impact on the growth rates we're going to discuss for the plan year. Second point, and I think that's self-evident, the prior plan apparently was submitted with 10 mills across the 5 years of the plan. Their comment was unrealistic. The 5-year plan agrees with that. We have a growing tax base. Again, this is a relatively high growth area, as it turns out. It does allow a declining millage rate. It goes from, at the moment, from 9.8 mils down to 9.45 mils. May be subject to change depending on commission consensus a few pages back. Next item that the state raised in their review of the plan that was submitted in 2018 said, we don't see anything there in terms of debt restructuring. And the debt they're referring to is what the city owes the county in regard to past water services that were not properly paid for, plus the installation of a new meter system. The second item they were talking to was the state prior year red light camera fees that had at this point remain unpaid. 5-year plan addresses these in the following ways. In regards to county water, no effort has been made in the plan itself to restructure the debt. There has been a proposal that's been put forward to possibly extend the remaining debt over 10 years, which would provide a surplus of cash in the first couple of years, a couple $1 million, which would be a real benefit in being able to even further accelerate the repair on the infrastructure. That savings has not been brought into the plan. The second debt that they referred to was the red light camera fees. The assumption of the plan right now is based on certain discussions with some members in the state. It's not in there, doesn't mean we're not addressing it. As everybody knows, the state is being approached with regard to debt modification. If it turns out that we do not get a debt modification, my assessment of the worst possible case would be a 10-year repayment plan with about $1 million of additional expense in the 5-year plan period, which can be accommodated by changing some priorities. Goes without saying that all other debt service requirements are being met. The next issue that the state raised was we don't see any discussion about rising expenditures. Answer to that is the plan is very explicit. There's a general expense increase of 2% a year. There's been a wage increase built in of 2% a year. Some expenses which don't typically grow at 2% a year, such as health costs that you just discussed a few moments ago. Typically is 6%, although as was pointed out, it's going to be 0% for FY21. Were put in at rates that are consistent with their history rather than the standard 2%. So that has been addressed explicitly. The next issue the state raised was you're talking about increases in stormwater revenue, but we don't see how you're doing that. 5-year plan is very explicit on that. There is a recommendation to move the stormwater charges to the property tax bill from the utility bills. As it's being billed on the utility bills, for a lot of reasons, very inefficient. This year, we expect to see $1 million of revenue. Next year, with some changes that we have to make to the utility bills, should be up to about $1.5 million. If it goes on the property tax bill, that'll raise it to a little over $2 million. If you're being charged for your stormwater charge right now on your utility bill, you won't see any change. It'll come off of your utility bill. It will go onto your property tax bill. And in fact, if you take advantage of the early payment discount, you'll actually save 3% on it. But really, the recommendation is to get it on there because some properties are not being fairly charged today through various reasons, some of which are technical. If it's on the property tax bill, then each and every property is going to be fairly assessed for its fair share of stormwater charges. The next item raised by the state was we don't see any discussion of cost reduction on impact on either positions or services. 5-year plan recognized the fact that we function in a lean mode for FY20 with a 40% reduction headcount from about 5 years ago. FY21 is really predicated on FY20. And in fact, even though we're running with a lean organization, the strength that we see in the property tax base makes it feasible and affordable to actually add up to 10 people and to enhance service. So rather than a negative impact on position services, 5-year plan talks to a positive, both in terms of staffing, or more importantly, in terms of staff, in terms of services. The last item that the state raised was a very lengthy discussion, but really what it says is you need to review your operations, identify any and all possible savings opportunities, including consolidation. The plan response to that is it cycles back to what we just discussed a moment ago. FY20 is a very lean organization. In fact, it's generated a fair amount of savings. The FY21 budget is really predicated on the same structure as FY20. State approved the FY20 budget with very minimal modifications, primarily moving things out of expenditure lines into reserves, but not cutting back on the overall expenditures. Based on comments that we've received or I've received so far from the state, all of the questions have been technical and of a very minor nature. We do get feedback on the FY21 budget tomorrow, and my anticipation is that we will not see major modifications again. To the extent that the state accepted the FY20 budget, and I think is likewise going to accept the FY21 budget, in essence, they are validating and said, okay, this is a cost-effective operation. So I think we've met this criteria. And in terms of consolidation, we actually have done a little bit of consolidation. Budget and procurement at this point have been consolidated into a single position. Okay, now I'm moving on to the state statute that was referred to in the state's response. I think they meant it in a narrower sense of this statute, but since other aspects of it have been introduced in recent conversations, I'm going to address all four components of it, and you'll see that several of these address what we've already talked about. Again, one of the four requirements under this portion of the statute is all obligations must be paid on schedule. And again, we are doing that, with the only exception being the red light camera. That's being discussed. If it comes out to be a worst case scenario, we can accommodate that. Second item in the statute is whatever the budgeting needs to be either on a priority basis or zero based, and most importantly, to avoid unaffordable items. The 5-year plan clearly is based on prioritization requirements. We, by definition, would not include anything that was not deemed to be a priority for the state to continue to level an affordable level of service. The word unaffordable is important because unaffordable means that you actually have to go into your reserves to pay for things that you can't otherwise afford. There is nothing in the 5-year plan where there is any use of reserves for anything other than capital, and is intended to be used for capital. No use of reserves for operating expense. Therefore, there's nothing in the plan that reflects an unaffordable consumption. Third item in the statute is basically a no-brainer for finance people. It says, hey, you should not be funding ongoing operations with one-time sources of funding. Excuse me. The only use of one-time funding in the 5-year plan is either through grants or through loans. Those are strictly for CIP, which is not ongoing operations. There is no indication in the 5-year plan of funding any ongoing operations with one-time source of funding. The last one is a repeat of what we talked before. I think this is really what the state was referring to when they included the reference to the statute. Again, we've addressed it. We believe we're running lean. The state has validated through acceptance our plans, and we have done a limited amount of consolidation. So that takes care of the second of the 3 criteria that I said we were going to look at in terms of what I was going to tell you about in terms of pre-announcing. These are the city priorities. They are in no particular sequence, just as I happen to put them down on paper. The first certainly is well understood by all, and that is to fully resolve all financial issues. 5-year plan addresses it in 2 ways. The 5-year plan is first and foremost, well, I shouldn't say first and foremost, is extensively a financial plan populated with a gazillion numbers. Equally important is the first 10 pages with the plan message, which really conveys a lot of what's going on that can't be addressed in the numerical portion of the plan. For restoring financial issues, the financial plan portion of it really addresses it. In there, it shows all the funding required to fully staff that department as opposed to its current status. It shows the money necessary to conduct a study of assets so that that no longer becomes an audit issue. It reflects training expenses for the finance department, corrects software and hardware expenses. So it is really set up to fully finance the finance department so that it can fully restore itself. In the plan message, it further addresses it, discusses the progress that's been made in catching up on the audits that have been lagging, the progress that's been made in implementing financial policies, procedures, staff training, and so forth. So the plan directly deals with the issue of resolution of financial issues. The second issue, and again, in no particular priority, is one of the items that's been on the priority list for a long time is resolution of the prior account, delinquent accounts that still exist where customers have now switched over to the county billing system. So these are what's left of the account before that transition. The financial plan doesn't address the financial impact of that. There's not enough track record at this point to either make a prognosis either positive or negative, so it does not address it. It is addressed in passing in the plan message in the first 10 pages, but no more than work in progress. So clearly a city priority. Don't know enough at this point to declare what the outcome is going to be, therefore not reflected directly in the plan. Third priority, and I've got several items here, and this is a point that I get to fall on my sword, as I'll explain in a moment. This addresses the clearly recognized need that the city's infrastructure, and that would be streets and sidewalks, that would be your water and sewer systems, that would be your stormwater system, all have been underinvested for too long, are in desperate need of upgrading. The plan, 5-year plan, makes a very concerted effort to demonstrate the fact that this will be done. If I can call your attention to the bottom of the page, you have a group of city engineer consultants right now that are very actively pulling together their recommendations as to what the city should be first spending their money on. That, I believe, is going to be made available certainly within the next 2 to 3 months. On a very preliminary basis, they've indicated at least $60 million. Understood, this plan, as listed here, indicates 49 million going in that direction. Let me make the following point now. I won't go back again. In discussions this morning, I came to the realization that the debt service that I put in place in the I'm sorry. Okay. I came to the realization this morning that the debt service that I put in place for FY24 and FY25 was understated. Consequently, for the water sewer plan, the 21.1 million is going to be reduced by $780,000. And the same issue for the stormwater plan, the 21.7 is going to be reduced by 900,000. This is about a 3% reduction on a $48 million proposal. It's embarrassing, but it's not material. By the way, if I have raised any questions, if I have not made anything clear, please stop me. In terms of ongoing priorities, parks, this plan does identify the ability to fund $1.6 million. The mechanism for doing that we will discuss shortly. And then the last high priority item is the status of the operational audit findings resolution. That's not addressed in the financial portion of the 5-year plan. It is addressed in the plan message. Be very candid, it is not at a point that any of us want it to be. It just didn't get done at the rate it should have gotten done. The plan message acknowledges that, makes it very clear that within the next 60 days, primarily due to my availability, this is going to be a primary focus, and it's the city's intention that it will be fully addressed by the time we get to the latter part of October. Okay, that was the preamble in terms of telling you what I was going to tell you about. Now what I'd like to do is take you through not 150 pages of details, but a high-level page on each of about 7 different funds, tell you the good news that's buried there. Again, as I said, going to ask for a consensus about 2 pages back from here, which we'll get to in a moment. But these, starting that discussion, this is where the good news in terms of the general fund. The important bullets, as I see it, under the assumptions we currently have, which first and foremost, amongst other things, includes the millage rate reduction, generates a fund balance at the end of FY25 of 4.5 million. Reminder, at this point, the target is 3.2 million. Gives the city bragging rights of 1.3 million, says, hey, not only can we get to our target, we can blow through it. That is going to be subject to change in about 5 minutes. Second very important thing is what I spent a lot of time on the other evening is the tax growth. The growth of the tax base in this city is really a leader in the county. We had to dial it back for FY22 and FY23. The assumption, and I feel very comfortable in making the recommendation, it's going to resume to historic levels in F24 and 25. Again, millage rate reduction, understand that it's got to come down. Cannot leave it at 10 mils. At this point in the plan, it says coming down to 9.45 to be discussed momentarily. Making a major IT investment, going to be a much smarter city in 5 years, going to be a much stronger technology base than what we have today. Mentioned before that we don't have to talk about reductions impacting services. In fact, we feel comfortable enough with the revenue that's in the 5-year plan that we're recommending bringing 10 people on within general fund funds, within general fund division, excuse me. Police and 4, public works 5, and 1 parks and recreation once the park system starts to be renovated, coming forward in FY23. As discussed before, 2% annual wage increase for staff. That's for everybody except PBA members, which have their own plan. One of the important things of this plan is not only is the expense under control enough, but it does allow the general fund to contribute $250,000 per year starting in FY22 to the CIP fund, either for additional roadway projects or for other infrastructure usage. And to calibrate the meaning of that, $250,000 a year, if it were to go into road resurfacing, would constitute about 2 miles of road resurface by itself. And this is only one of the funding sources for road resurface, as you'll see. And certainly the other important thing is the city is now at the point where it can again focus on restoring the parks and recreation system to make it into something that the city can take great pride on. Okay, what does this mean in the numbers? I promise you we will not go into 150 pages of detail, but I wanted to at least expose you to the very high level numbers to give you a sense of how they all come together. Having said that, I would ask you to look at the revenue line, and you can see I've highlighted FY22 and FY23. Message there is the revenue is basically flat. And again, it's because of having to dial back on the property tax base growth in those years because of the pandemic. Otherwise, you would have seen much greater growth there. Second line I'll bring to your attention is the transfer in. And if you were looking at it, you say, well, how does that get $1 million better than in FY22? Answer is the primary funding source of that is surplus funds out of your debt service that come to the general fund after debt service is covered. The number that was put in for FY21 was very conservative. I'll be the first to admit it. FY22 has been restored to traditional levels, and that generates the growth. The only other 2 points that I will bring to your attention on this page, unless you have other questions, is you can see the compensation number jumps in FY22. That's the function of bringing on 9 additional people in FY22, as mentioned in the prior page, and then 1 more in FY23, which gives you a little more growth. The last item that I'll ask you to look at on this page is in the lower right-hand corner, the $4.5 million that we talked about for fund balance. Okay, this is where I could greatly use some assistance from the commission. We have been talking so far about case 1. This is a graph that shows for different assumptions about millage rate, all other things being equal, where the city's going to end up in general fund balance as of FY25. Case 1 in blue shows that in fact in FY25 in fact ends up at the 4.5 million that we talked about. And as I said, you can see the dotted line there is the target line that as a minimum requirement the city has to satisfy to be considered to be financially in financial control of its resources. There's a more aggressive millage rate reduction case. That's the green numbers. So instead of ending up at 9.45 mils in FY25, you end up at 9.1 mils in FY25. That is an acceptable case because, as you can see from the graph, at that point your fund balance is still a couple $100,000 above your threshold. So that's an acceptable case. It takes down some of your flexibility, and I'll go into that in a second. But let me address the third case. Third case is even a more aggressive reduction of your millage rate, such that by the time you get to FY25, you in fact end up at 8.75 mils as opposed to 9.45 mils. You can see there you're looking at a problem because at this point you're about $800,000 below the threshold you have to be at to achieve the minimum fund balance. If I can digress for a second, this relates to the discussion we had the other day about why the city cannot in the foreseeable future have a millage rate that's down under 8. As discussed the other night, the way to get there is twofold. One, identify other sources of revenue within the general fund to take the burden off of the general fund, off of the property tax, moment we don't know where that revenue is. And then the other way you do it is you have an escalating tax value base. City's getting there, but it's not going to get there overnight. So to the extent your tax base is not going to grow that quickly, although it's growing rather impressively, and since you can't identify alternate sources of revenue, you're not going to get down under 8 mils in the foreseeable future. Point is, if you really want to give serious consideration to case 3 and get the millage rate down to 8.75, then you've got to go back into your general fund and take out about $800,000 or roughly $200,000 over the last 4 years. I would maintain it's a very lean budget right now. To take another $200,000 out each year for 4 years probably is not the best thing to do to be able to maintain service to the community. So in terms of providing you with options, I would urge you not to look at case 3, but to consider case 1 or 2, or somewhere in between case 1 or 2, if that's your preference. I will tell you, the 5-year plan is not a binding plan, but it is a statement of direction. If you put in a more severe reduction in millage rate now, somebody's going to look back. I mean, the circumstances may well change, and you may not, 9.1 may not be feasible five years from now. The safest, most conservative thing to do would be to case 1, but at this point, I certainly would appreciate guidance as to what consensus is among the commission as to which of these 2 cases best meets your preferences.
All right, floor is open for discussion.
Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anathan, for your presentation and giving us insight as far as the millage rate is concerned and our options for growth in the coming fiscal years. Looking at your recommendation, it looks like we, I guess, can kind of narrow it down to case 1 and case 2. Of course, case 1 being the original recommendation that you proposed, and case 2 being a slightly more aggressive decline over the next couple of years. It seems to, based on my interpretation, that case 2 seems to put us, look like, I mean, we got a little opportunity for growth, but we're pretty much right at the margin. Given the uncertainty, of our fiscal future, given the pandemic and, revenue shortages that may be on the, on the forefront, I think we should take more of the conservative approach, and I think stick with case 1. I think that gets us, down in essence as far as the millage rate is concerned, and at least lets our residents know that, although we're in a financial emergency, we are giving consideration to the millage rate and the concerns about that. Also, in reference to the stormwater utility fee, that's a great recommendation. Whoever from the administration kind of proffered that item. I've been a big advocate about, just kind of ensuring that our businesses and our residents and, just our, community in large, pay their fair share from a tax perspective. So in my opinion, that move, moving into the tax bill as opposed to, charging a fee, on a per diem basis, kind of like when we send out our water bills, it'll definitely yield a more equitable return. So thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other discussion points?
Mayor Paget.
Commissioner Bass.
I would like to just echo the sentiments of Vice Mayor Davis. I think case 2 is too risky. I would like to see it high going low instead of being low and having to go high. That would just be nerve-wracking for me. So I believe that case 1 for me looks as if that's where we should maintain. We should stay right now. And good work. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
Mayor,
Commissioner Kelly.
let me just say for the sake of time, I want to submit all of my questions to the manager and he can have the budget direct answer because I have about 25 questions and I don't even want to spend that much time going over all of them. I do want to ask just one simple question, and that is regarding the, CRA, the assumptions that are made for not only staffing, but the no need for CRA to help with the historical city hall project and to take 200,000 from CRA annually for 4 years. To me, it's quite a bit. Where did that assumption come from? Because we were told that we needed money to finish City Hall, et cetera. So we got, I know we're, I guess, projecting to get it from the bond. We determined that we can get it all from the bond now. It's the mayor to the manager to whomever.
Floor is open, Mr. Manager.
I yield to the budget administrator.
Yes, sir, Commissioner Kelly, thank you. Again, the $200,000 a year, first off, this is not the end of the presentation. We will look at CRA in a little more detail. So I will address your question now, but hopefully I'll address it better when we get to that page. The $200,000 was just an assumption as a starting point. I'm going to show you that over the plan period, the 5 years starting next October 1st for 5 years, the CR has probably about $5 million to directly invest in city improvements. It was offered on a preliminary basis that one portion of that, let me backtrack in fact. My understanding without having read it is that part of the CRA plan addresses parks. And this is in response to that. It's, again, this is a statement of direction. It's not a lock. There is nothing that you'll see tonight that you'll subsequently approve that locks the city into funding or the CRA to funding $200,000 a year for the next 4 years. It is a way to get to a point to give you a much better system, a much better city in FY 25. So it's a statement of direction rather than a firm commitment to do the same. Oh, I'm sorry, and you did raise the question on the historic district. Originally, it was thought that there was going to be alternate sources of city funding that could pick up the slack in terms of adding to the $600,000 that had already been obligated by the general obligation bond fund. There were certain issues arose that called the availability of that funding into question. The Public Works Director has had subsequent discussions with the folks who administer the GOB fund program, and they have indicated on a very preliminary basis a willingness to pick up the entire tab as long as we demonstrate certain progress. And that's the assumption that's built in there for better or worse. Like there's every number in here, once you get beyond the budget, is an assumption. And that's one of the assumptions.
Commissioner Kelly, you still have the floor. Commissioner Kelly?
I couldn't hear anything, so I don't know what happened.
Okay, you still have the floor.
Okay, I didn't hear any of his response because it just froze up, so I don't know what happened. But he can give it to me in writing. The other question, if he can hear me, deals with the stormwater. I know we're planning on putting it, the water rates on the tax bill. And there's projected to be, according to the analysis, $2 million for funding infrastructure. Have we determined what that's going to be used for yet?
Through the mayor, the answer to that is you've got a group of engineering consultants that right now are going through all of the priorities of the city in terms of not only roads and streets and water and sewer, but stormwater as well. They propose to provide a set of recommendations, I believe, within the next 2 months, at which point those projects would start to be populated.
Okay, and the last question that I have, you assume $200,000 annually of FERDAP grants. Did I see that correctly, that you anticipate getting $200,000 annually? Have you all talked to someone that means that we're projected that amount every year?
Commissioner, that is an assumption. I have been in other cities where they do get Florida Recreation and Development grants on a regular basis. That's built in there as an assumption. Like everything else, it is an assumption. One of the services that's in the budget, albeit in the water sewer side, is the services of a grant writing service, not a person, but a service to get the city to be more aggressive in seeking out grants. This would be one of the ones I'd certainly recommend. Again, my experience in other cities these are reasonably available unless something's happened because of the pandemic. So for better or worse, that is an assumption in the budget, in the 5-year plan at the moment.
I don't have a problem with the over optimistic, but that is because everybody's applying for those, and usually it's very difficult to get 4 straight years of FERDAP of that amount. I mean, I understand you can apply, but we'll see how it goes. As I said, Mr. Mayor, and to the manager, I will submit the other 24 in writing because I don't want to spend up another hour hearing answers and take up everybody's time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor, if I can address one point on that, and then I'll move on down the road on the second. Commissioner Kelly, to the extent that the city's not able to get a FERDAP grant in a given year, the general fund is moving $250,000 into the Safe Neighborhood CIP fund, ostensibly for road work. Certainly it will be the decision of the commission that maybe that money would be used for park development if the FERDAP is not available. If no other questions, I will keep on moving through this, if that's all right. Oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to echo the sentiments of Vice Mayor Davis and Commissioner Bass in regards to the millage rate. I know that is a big concern, and also our surplus. I would like to make sure we get out of this financial oversight and financial crisis as soon as possible. And having that case 1 millage rate will help us get to that point. And it looks like that means it's going to take us almost 4 additional years on top of the 4 years that we've been in to get out of this financial crisis with those conservative case 1 estimates. So that's way longer than the 5 years that we were supposed to be in this crisis. But at least we have some type of light at the end of the tunnel if we make this sacrifice as residents and property owners to pay the funds. So thank you for proposing that. And just overall in general, looking at this plan, I see a very conservative effort on a lean government that maximizes our revenues and with investments in our infrastructure, our streets, on the basis of what this makes this government benefit residents and businesses. So much respect, Mr. Anathan, Mr. Manager, for taking the time to be conservative and make sure that we can invest in the infrastructure of our community. And once we get out of this financial crisis, we'll be in a lot better position to provide our residents with the services, activities that they desire above the needs that we need every day living in the city of Opa-locka. Thank you.
Mayor and Commissioner, thank you for your recommendation. I was hoping that's where you'd end up. Thank you. Oh, I've frozen again.
Mr. Mayor?
Vice Mayor?
If I may just ask a question to Mr. Anathan in reference to the 60 million that he referred to in his presentation earlier to fix some of our infrastructure challenges. I guess it was done by a city engineer. The 60 million estimate that you were referring to, is that citywide, Mr. Anathan?
Mayor, if I may, That was a very, and I underlined it on the page, a very, very preliminary estimate done by the group of consulting engineers that you approved in the last couple of months. They really, at the time, I had asked the public works director to really come up with a back of the envelope number just to get me started. That was their number. I think it's certainly not a maximum number, but again, that work is going to be finalized over the next couple of months, and then everybody's going to have a much better number to refer to.
And I guess as we finalize those numbers and that assessment, are we looking at any sort of special assessments? I know we kind of talked about it from the DIS, but has any consideration been given on the, with the 5-year plan and then, the work that you're doing on the ground?
My understanding, I've been made aware it's under discussion. It is in such a preliminary basis at this point that I didn't think it was appropriate to bring it into the 5-year plan. But yes, I made the comment before, identify alternate sources of general fund funding. And that would be one if it comes to fruition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, that completes all that I had intended to cover on the general fund. Again, anybody who has any questions at any level of detail, I will do my best to answer, but I'm going to try and keep this at a very high level just to respect everybody's time. Moving on to the water sewer fund highlights. Assumption over the 5 years is what the rates are for the city remain unchanged. Ideally, they would go up.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes, sir.
are you looking at a PowerPoint?
I am. Apparently you're not.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where did you go? Okay. I'm back in business, I think. Okay, am I back online?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure how I dropped out, but apologies. All right, as I was saying, we have moved on from the general fund very quickly in the water sewer fund highlights. The assumption is constant rates throughout the plan period. From one perspective, we'd like to see them higher, but know that they're way too high already, so that certainly is an option. And at this point cannot be brought down based on the costs that we're looking at right now. Key assumption, city becomes creditworthy in FY23. That allows this fund to draw down $14 million of new debt, preferably from SRF, but from somebody. The debt service, both current debt service and future, which will be incurred because of this additional $14 million of debt, can be accommodated within this plan without a major problem. As a side point, just a reminder, and we've talked about it a couple times already, over the plan period, next 5 years, under the current debt repayment schedule to the county, the city is going to pay $5.1 million towards that debt. It will leave another $1 million to be paid beyond the 5-year period. As mentioned before, there has been a proposal submitted, which, if it goes through and makes sense, could change the schedule back to 10-year repayment and provide relief in the near term to make it a more major investment in water sewer infrastructure. To get down to the weeds for a second, we pay about $4 million a year to the county for either buying water for resale or for having them process wastewater processing. Assumption there is 3%, which is their advertised increase, not always, but advertised. Offset a little bit by the investments we're making in the water sewer infrastructure to reduce water loss and also I&I infiltration. That's way down the weeds, but just to let you know I did address it. Assumption is that the billing legal issues that are underway are resolved by the end of FY22. And going back to a topic we've already discussed, that the task force that's working on the former accounts that still have delinquency has not been included in plan other than being discussed in the plan message. Oops, frozen again. So what does that mean in terms of the numbers? I'm not going to go through all these numbers to everybody's relief. I just want to point out in terms of funding sources, You can see the impact of the new debt starting in FY23 through FY25. You can see, if I can ask you to come down to the capital line, the city is aggressively investing as we speak, or at least next year, in capital infrastructure, also in FY22. These are with funds that have already been lined up, either on loans that haven't been pulled down, or primarily loans that have been pulled down. From FY23 to FY25, you can see the increase in capital expenditures driven by the borrowing, and you can see the debt service. What I'll bring your attention to is you can, in FY23, using my pointer as a cursor, you can see it jumps up to 2.7 million. This reflects not only the new debt that's being brought aboard, but also bringing on another layer of county debt at roughly $500,000 a year. You can then see in FY24, having paid off the payments this year of 1.2 million that we've been paying, we'll pay through FY23. You can see the drop in debt service, and that's at that point you start to build up your fund balance. One more page on this very quickly. This is in the same format that we looked at for the general fund. You can see there is a dotted line which defines the level at which this fund balance should be at, does not get to there until FY25. And again, what's retarding it is the large amount of debt being repaid to the county in the FY21 to FY23 periods. Moving on to stormwater.
So Anderson,
Yes, sir.
that slide right there, is that based upon our current pay scale or a renegotiation of our payment plan?
No, sir. This is the original payment plan. Again, a proposal has been developed. It is not in the plan. If it were in the plan, you'd see much faster growth towards the dotted line.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear before. Okay, moving on down to stormwater. This is probably the healthiest fund we have. It's got a very substantial fund balance. In fact, it's over $2 million when, because it's such a small fund, really it only requires a minimum fund balance in the range of $100,000 to $150,000. In fact, it is so healthy that in the FY21 plan that has been initially approved by the commission and submitted to the state for approval, the plan does call for close to $2 million usage of that fund balance to be very aggressive even next year in terms of stormwater infrastructure improvement. We've discussed the recommendation to go to the property tax bill for billing purposes. It will cause everybody to pay their fair share. It will be much more equitable. Important thing about the health of this fund is even with the current revenue cost structure, the cash that's generated under this cost structure is sufficient enough to allow $700,000-800,000 of what's called pay-as-you-go capital investment, i.e., you don't do that, you don't fund it through debt, you actually pay for it as you incur it. So this is a healthy fund, as you'll see momentarily. Plus, there's enough there to be able to cover any additional debt service that we were talking about in the next line, where again, where the city becomes creditworthy in FY23. The recommendation here is that this fund draw down $15 million of debt. We will be creditworthy. And just as a side point, no increase is necessary in the standard rate, which is $6 per stormwater unit right now. Graphically, schedule-wise, what does that look like? I'd ask you to look up at the revenue line for FY22 for 1 second, where it's highlighted. You can see $2 million. As I said, FY21, we think with some repairs that need to be done to the utility bill, we can get up to $1.5 million. We're clearly going to the property tax bill, if that's an acceptable option, would get you at least another $500,000 on top of where we think we can get in FY21. Next line down is the loans. You can see the impact of it. I ask you then to come down to the capital line, about 6 lines down. You can see even with no new loans, an aggressive capital investment program in next year being FY21, FY22. And then when you have the availability of these loans, you can see that then this capital investment program really takes off exponentially. Last number I'll point out on this, just a reminder, lower left-hand column, use of fund balance. the FY21 budget that's been preliminary approved does make use of close to $2 million of fund balance. Graphically, what does this look like using the same format as what we saw in the previous comparable pages? You can see by FY20, it's forecast to build up to a surplus of 2.2 million. Just to make it clear, the audited numbers are FY18, FY19, FY20 are the best I can do based on numbers that are currently available to me. By the time you get through the FY19 audit, FY20 audit, these numbers undoubtedly will change, but I think they're certainly going to be in this ballpark. Dotted line shows you that whereas the general fund balance has a requirement to have 3 to 3+ million in minimum fund balance, this one is down in the $100,000 to $200,000 range, and in fact is covered quite nicely by the plan. To go back to the subject that Commissioner Kelly originally addressed, and hopefully I'll be able to address a couple of things here. The revenue that's going to be available to the CRA over the next 5 years under the current assumptions, again with depressed property tax revenue in FY22, FY23, $6.6 million, and coming into the start of next year, my estimate is that the available fund balance would be $800,000. All said, that says over the 5-year plan period that if everything is spent that is received in terms of revenue, plus the $800,000 that is spent that's available now in fund balance. And by the way, this fund does not have a requirement for a minimum fund balance. So anything that's in fund balance is fair game to be spent if the CR board identifies the appropriate expenditure for it. Having said that, there are some administrative expenses. I'm estimating that roughly 5.4 million, including the $800,000 of fund balance, is available over the 5-year period to be utilized to make the city a better place. The other thing, which is kind of new news, is that one of the assumptions is that instead of 4 people being deemed to work on it on a 10% basis, that there would be 1 full-time employee brought in FY22, and then again in FY23, and then most of your community development staff would revert back to full-time efforts on the community development side, whereas the community development director would spend his time half with the CRA and half with community development. And you'll see the impact of that on the next page. Again, not because it is monumental, but I would ask you to focus on the compensation line. You can see the FY21 budget, which says, hey, 29,000 and change for 4 people on a 10% basis. FY22, suddenly had 1 full-time person. FY23, 2 full-time people. The next line down is the operating expense, where most of the money is going to come from for your improvement in projects, but it's not all there. I'll ask you to also look at the transfer out line, 2 lines down, where you can see in FY21, we're talking about 17,000 and change. FY22, it is $214,550 and growing at a very slow rate thereafter. That increase, in fact, is the $200,000 assumed to come from the CRA to go into parks improvement. It is an assumption. It's going to have to be approved by the CRA board, but it is a starting point as to a feasible way to possibly start the renovation, the desired renovation of both the park facilities and its programs. It's nothing more than an assumption. Bottom line, fund balance stays the same each year. The argument there is, for the moment, that the CRA spends every dollar that it receives during the year, but does not spend any of the fund balance. So that's what the picture looks like on the CRA. Again, it has no requirement for minimum fund balance, so you don't get a graph that has some dotted lines on it. Getting down close to the end, town center. One key assumption here is it is not fully occupied at this point. Really has to be 100% occupancy to begin to earn its own way within the town. This is going to be accomplished by other things through a property manager, the oversight of the property manager. One thing that's a little bit techy, but I will bring it to your attention. Next year, or I should say for FY21, the city for the first time, is going to have to pay a full property tax of roughly about $160,000 on the building, as opposed to zero this year. That occurred because one of the tenants turned out to be a for-profit tenant. That, put bluntly, poisoned the well and made the whole building liable to property tax. The county has recommended that the building to be divided into condominium units such that in future years, that any property that does have a for-profit tenant will receive a property tax assessment, property tax bill. All other properties not having a for-profit tenant will remain tax-free. So that's wonky, that's down in the weeds, but it's something that clearly has to be done. And it clearly has to be done by December 31st this year, or it's not, we'll have the same problems next year. If I can second. Yes, sir.
Quick question. What's the business that is for profit in the town center?
I don't have that at fingertip. If Shemeka's online, she may be able to answer that directly. Probably, I'm sure the city manager may be able to. I apologize. I don't have that at fingertips. It's just, it was a problem and we responded to it. I've lost track of which unit it is. But we contested with the county property appraiser and it was lost. They didn't accept the appeal.
Mr. Manager? Did we lose the manager? All
Mayor,
right.
I'll get you that.
I want to say it's a school on the 3rd floor, but I could be wrong.
That is my instinct also, but again, that's a subjective opinion on my part. In fact, now, I'm sorry, I will confirm that because
yeah,
we did. I'm sorry, please.
It is a school on the 3rd floor. It is a school on the 3rd floor.
Yes, sir. I agree because we did talk to them. They are for profit. I apologize. I forgot about that. Okay. I'm sorry.
Nothing.
All right. And the fourth bullet here is really as important as any bullet on this page. In the FY21 budget, the general fund has to, for lack of a better word, subsidize or pay for rent of approximately $400,000 FY22 through FY25 because of the 100% occupancy. That's going to be reduced to 100,000. And you can see that on this page. Again, a bunch of numbers. I would just invite your attention to the upper left-hand corner. You can see the revenue that's in the FY21 budget is 221,000 from tenants, 100% occupancy and fixing some rental problems that existed in FY21, 413,000. And equally important, next line down, whereas in FY21, the general fund has to provide 431,000 to cover anything that the rental revenue doesn't come. That drops down to 111,000 in FY22 and basically stays at that level. One or two remaining, and then I certainly will be open for any all discussions. Very briefly on the internal service highlights, the only bullet I would leave you with there is this is really going to be a change in how the city does business. It's being led by the IT director. He has some very ambitious ideas. He has identified areas such as building license, clerk, and many other departments that are really in a very fertile position for getting applications installed, not very expensive applications that are really going to change the way the city does business and really start to make it look like a smart business as opposed to some of the procedures that are in place right now. Risk management, the insurance cost is assumed to increase 5% annually. That's just to indicate that is one of the things that is different than the 2% adjustment that we talked about in one of the early pages. 3 pages, want to show you where the money is going to be spent. Again, addressing the point that once you get into water, sewer, and in stormwater, we know the money's there. You've got consultants that will provide a list of priority projects. That is not available today. That should be available in 2 months. For the governmental funds, projects we've been talking about. You can see where the funding sources is. I won't belabor the point if anybody has any questions. Again, the parks, the assumption is half from the CRA, half from grants. I would point out, if I may, that immediately below is $1 million that is coming from the general fund at the moment, nominally targeted towards roadways and sidewalks. That is money that can easily be reprogrammed in parks, either to improve the investment or if it turns out that FERDAP are not available every year. So again, this is an aspirational statement of where funding may be available to get grants. Yes, the city has to make an effort. There should be some out there. To the extent the city hasn't gotten a FERDAP grant, or I'm sorry, Florida Recreational Development grant in a long time, I would hope that they would be at the high end of the list for a while in terms of catch up. So unless there are any questions, one last point, if I may. You can see at the moment, we've got under roadway and sidewalks, we're talking about $5.3 million. Again, if the city invests roughly $600,000 to $700,000 a year just on roadway resurfacing, certainly a reasonable number within this 5-year number. At $600,000 to $700,000 a year, you get to do about 4.5 miles of road. You've got 46 miles of road. That would say you would resurfacing on a staggered basis every road every 10 years, which I believe is a very normal resurfacing rotation schedule. So it's certainly within the means of the city to do that based on these assumptions. Water sewer CIP, Carroll Lane, again, is in there. You'll see it in all three because portions of the $4 million project are covered both on the roadside, water sewer, and to a certain extent in stormwater. All of the new loans are down in the future projects, as was discussed a moment ago. Don't know what they are. In two months, you're going to have a much better statement of what they are. And you can see how the funding is going to occur to do basically about $21 million of projects. One last chart, if I may, stormwater. Again, you can see here, we did discuss in general details, pardon me, $21.7 million investment. You can see on the right-hand side how much of that is going to be addressed in the first year through the existing stormwater fund balance. And the other important thing is, if I can take you down to the line right here, where it says $4 million of stormwater fund revenue. This is the pay-as-you-go investment. So it says, in addition to the new loans of $15 million, there's enough surplus being generated by this fund at the moment to also fund another $1 million of pay-as-you-go each year. So that's a statement of the real strength and health of this, particularly if the recommendation is accepted to move the stormwater charges back onto the property appraiser bill. Okay, so that is what I was going to tell you. This is where I think we are in FY25. I think it's a great story. I think the state is going to be impressed that the city has really been able to basically effect a turnaround. And to not pull any punches, it really has to do with strengthening of the city's tax base. I mean, the addition of the Amazon distribution center certainly was a giant step forward. But even without that, the history of the city has been a continual leader in growth of the tax base. And this plan certainly says it's going to happen, albeit with not enjoying that growth during the next 2 years due to the impact of the pandemic. Declining millage rate, great recommendation. I certainly appreciate that. It is a directional statement. Doesn't say you won't go lower, but it does say pay attention, know that we have to respect the community in terms of their needs, moving in the right direction. You're going to have you're going to have the CRA that's been able to invest $5 million into the city. Certainly by the time you get to FY25, you're going to have a far better city for that money. You've got a very aggressive technology plan, which is going to give you a much smarter system. Much smarter city than you have today. And it should be the engine for change in terms of a lot of the business processes. By putting in the new technology, it will demand that business processes change. You're going to have the community bitching about not being able to get around because the roads are being so badly torn up due to all the infrastructure work, because you're going to be in the midst of a major infrastructure improvement program at this time. And you have been able to finally get to the point where you can start to really get to things the community is looking for in terms of parks and recreation, both programs and facilities, to really make it become, again, a pride of the community. And new news, I'll just throw this in here. As you get to the end of FY25, your obligations under the FY11 bond and the FY15 notes are approaching maturity. There will be a balloon payment that is going to make a little demand on FY26, but once you play through that, each and every year beyond that, you're going to have another $1.2 million available to you that you haven't enjoyed for the last 20 years. So I think it's a great story. That's where this is basically what we've talked about for the last half hour and how that's going to be put together amongst the various funds. And my belief is city on the move.
Thank you, Mr. Anathan, for such a thorough, excellent presentation in regards to our city and the most important document for our city at the moment due to this financial crisis that we're in. Much respect for taking the time to be so thorough and also providing those conservative estimates where, as I said, investments in our infrastructure and what's going to make the maximum impact on our residents and businesses throughout the city of Opa-locka. So thank you very much. The floor is open for any discussion and questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions to Mr. Anathan about, I guess, the parks and the contribution that the CRA is making on behalf of the improvements over the years. Ultimately, that has to be approved, I guess, by the CRA board. Is that, like, would it be approved for the next fiscal year or just for the 5-year plan? Just help me kind of understand the, I guess, the level of approval and what's included in that to kind of get something like that moving.
Mayor, if I can answer that question. That starts in FY22. That would be part of the budget formulation that would be done next spring and next summer.
Okay, so it's really next year.
Yes, sir. And again, I'm sorry, I didn't address your second part. It certainly is driven by the CRA board.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Burke.
To Mr. Anathan. Mr. Robert, I heard you say because the school is in City Hall, I think you said we're gonna have to pay $160,000 in property taxes. Are we gonna have to do that as long as the school is in City Hall?
Through the mayor, if I may. No, sir, that would be why we would subdivide the building into condominium units. Then each unit that has a for-profit tenant in it would be subject to property tax, and they would pick that up. So we're sidestepping, and I will point out that of the $160,000 on the tax bill, guess where 50-some thousand of it goes? It comes back to the city. So it's, it is, in absolute numbers, it is 160, but in net numbers, it's close to 100, which is still way too big, but it's not as bad as 160,000.
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Burke.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, to the manager, have we gotten a professional manager for that building yet? Because that should have been picked up before that school was moved into the city. And these are some of the things that can happen when you have people doing things that don't know what they're doing. But I guess if we can go ahead and subdivide the building into condos like Mr. Anathan is saying, I guess that will resolve that. But I think had we had a professional management company in that building, that's $160,000 we wouldn't be paying. Thank you.
Just to follow up on Commissioner Burke's point, Mr. Manager, what is the status of a property manager for Town Center 1?
That's the FY 21 objective within the first quarter. RFP will be going out.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the 5-year recovery plan? All right. With that, again, this is a very significant moment in our courts and our administration. At the moment, we have the opportunity to submit this document to the state, get their thoughts, and then relook at what those thoughts are and retool it if necessary, and vote on it. And hopefully the September, end of September, early October at the latest, for this 5-year recovery plan to be submitted. And that will fulfill our requirements. Since that time, we have been meeting all the other requirements since last year of our interlocal agreement with the state. So if we do this, we should be clear with that, which means our only other things that we have to tackle is making sure that these audits are submitted and complete. And based upon this plan, our audits will be up to date by June of 2021. And then lastly, getting our fund reserves up to par. So this city is moving very significantly, and it is amazing to be a witness and to be a part of this. And I want to give a shout out to our staff, its managers, Anathan, all those that have been working over these past few months and years to really turn this city around. And as we see that once we get ourselves together as a government, as we continue to do, then our whole community rises. With a significant investment in our infrastructure that's going to significantly improve property values and also the drivability and respect that business owners and residents have to investments in our parks is going to give our residents opportunities to do quite a few leisure activities and really bring that level of life back to our city as this pandemic starts to hope we get this pandemic under control as a nation. So I'm excited, and I just want to thank all the work that's been put involved in doing this. I know there's been a lot of overtime, a lot of time invested, and a lot of changing and adapting to the change within the city of Opa-locka. So much respect to all those involved, and also to my colleagues, because it is based upon the decisions that we make as a commission to ensure that we continue to move out of this financial crisis. So much respect to my colleagues for moving this city forward so significantly. And we look forward to hearing from the state in regards to their thoughts on our progress moving forward. So with that, are there any other thoughts before we wrap up this workshop tonight? All right. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Burke.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Bass. I want to thank everyone for this evening. Y'all everyone have a good night. Take care.
And to all a good night.